Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Thursday, September 21st, 2023. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today, Poland says it is no longer arming Ukraine. So Polish Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki said Wednesday that Poland is no longer arming Ukraine, and this marks a pretty significant shift in Polish policy as Warsaw has been a staunch supporter of the NATO proxy war with Russia. So Morawiecki's comments come amid a spat between Warsaw and Kiev over a Polish ban on Ukrainian grain. When asked if the dispute would impact Polish support for Ukraine, Morawiecki said, quote, "We are no longer transferring weapons to Ukraine because we are now arming Poland with more modern weapons," end quote. He insisted that Warsaw had no intention of risking the security of Ukraine, and he said that weapons shipments from other countries transiting through Poland would not be interfered with. I mean, that would be a huge deal if Poland said it was stopping other countries from shipping weapons to Ukraine, because Poland has become the hub for NATO weapon shipments to Ukraine, but he's not saying that. But still, this is definitely a very significant thing that he's saying here, because throughout the war, Poland really led the charge when it came to NATO escalations in support for Ukraine in a lot of ways. Military aid that Warsaw has provided includes hundreds of Soviet-made tanks, I know at least over 200, and about a dozen of the Soviet MiG-29 fighter jets. They were the first ones to arm Ukraine with fighter jets, not Western-made fighter jets, but still a huge escalation. Poland was also the first NATO country that said it was ready to arm Ukraine with the German-made Leopard tanks. Despite all this support, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky took a shot at Poland and two other EU countries for maintaining a ban on Ukrainian grain. Since the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the disruption of Black Sea shipping, there's been an influx of Ukrainian grain shipments into the EU, because they can't ship it all out by sea, so they're shipping it, by land. So earlier this year, the EU agreed to restrict the import of Ukrainian grain to both Bulgaria, Hungary, Poland, Romania, and Slovakia over complaints from farmers about a drop in prices due to all this Ukrainian grain that was coming in. As far as I understand this restriction, they could still ship the grain through these countries, but the grain could not be sold on their markets. So last week, the EU said that it would lift the restriction, but Poland, Hungary, and Slovakia said that they would continue banning Ukrainian grain from their markets. So at the UN General Assembly on Tuesday, Zelensky accused the countries of helping Russia. He said, quote, "Alarmingly, some in Europe play out solidarity in a political theater, turning grain into a thriller. They may seem to play their own roles. In fact, they're helping set the stage for a Moscow actor," end quote. So Ukraine has also said that it will lodge a complaint to the World Trade Organization. In response to this criticism, Morawiecki said, quote, "We were the first to do a lot for Ukraine, and therefore we expect our interests to be understood. We will defend our interests with all determination," end quote. So very interesting here. Could be some fracturing of NATO support for the war in Ukraine. It's also something, I know there's parliamentary elections in Poland next month. So this could be for domestic purposes, but still significant. And we'll see how this spat plays out. We'll see how the U.S. responds to this. All right, so the next one here, the next arms package for Ukraine will include more cluster bombs. Not a surprise. So President Biden will announce a new weapons package for Ukraine when Zelensky visits Washington on Thursday. And this was from a report from Reuters. So sources told Reuters that the package will be worth $325 million, and it's expected to include the second tranche of widely banned cluster munitions in the form of 155mm artillery shells. The U.S. began providing Ukraine with cluster munitions in July, despite their history of killing and maiming civilians. The cluster munitions that the U.S. is providing Ukraine are packed with 72 sub-munitions, known as bomblets, that are scattered over a large area. And cluster bombs are so hazardous to civilians because many of these sub-munitions do not explode on impact and can be found years or decades later, often by children who, pick them up and can get killed or maimed by them. And because of this, more than 100 countries have banned cluster bombs, but not the U.S., Ukraine, or Russia. So more cluster bombs, and a U.S. official also told Reuters that the new weapons package will not include the Army Tactical Missile Systems, or ATACMS, and those can be fired from the HIMARS rocket systems, and they have a range of up to 190 miles, which is significantly more than what the U.S. has been providing Ukraine. And ATACMS have long been sought by Ukraine, and there were recent media reports that said they could soon be on their way, but the White House said this week that no decision has been made, and it looks like Biden is not expected to announce them during the Zelensky visit. And providing ATACMS would mark a very significant escalation because of the range. They could potentially hit targets inside Russia. And if you remember earlier this month, Secretary of State Antony Blinken was asked if Ukraine gets these ATACMS, could they be used to target Russian territory? And Blinken said that the targeting decisions are up to Ukraine. But for now, no ATACMS, but unfortunately they're sending more cluster munitions. They just simply don't care about killing Ukrainian civilians or destroying the land for years to come. They just want to keep fueling this war. Speaking of which, the next story here, G7 official says that the Ukraine war could last for 7 more years. So the U.S. and its allies in the group of 7 are preparing to support the proxy war in Ukraine for years to come. And one unnamed official from a European G7 nation told Bloomberg that the war could last 6 or 7 more years, and that the allies need to prepare financially to keep fueling the conflict for that long. And this is something, this official is kind of putting a specific timeline, 6 or 7 years. But this is something we've seen U.S. and NATO officials say publicly. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said on Sunday, quote, "Most wars last longer than expected when they first begin. Therefore, we must prepare ourselves for a long war in Ukraine," end quote. So at the recent NATO summit in Vilnius, that was back in July, the G7 nations pledged to negotiate their own bilateral security deals with Ukraine to provide long-term military support. And the Biden administration is looking to reach a deal with Ukraine on long-term military support in an attempt to tie the hands of a future administration that might want to, end this support for this war. So that's kind of their thinking. They just want to make sure they can keep funding this thing for as long as they can. And right now, the White House is trying to still get that $24 billion in additional Ukraine aid that they have asked Congress for. And it's not clear if that's going to be passed by the end of the fiscal year, which ends on September 30th. That's what the White House wants. That's what the Democrats want. That's what most Republican hawks want. But there's just a lot of fighting going on in Congress. So it's not clear if it's going to happen. All right, so the next one here, the U.S. confirms U.S. citizen is detained in Ukraine. So the State Department has confirmed that American citizen Gonzalo Lira is being held in a Ukrainian prison over charges related to his speech and views on the war in Ukraine. So Lira is a popular YouTuber and journalist who was arrested by the Ukrainian security services in May for creating content that was critical of the Ukrainian government and explaining how the Russia-Ukraine war was provoked. He was charged over claims that he justified the Russian invasion. So Lira, who is also a citizen of Chile, he reappeared on social media in July. If you remember, I covered that. He posted a video on Twitter and he posted a video on YouTube and a thread on Twitter saying that he was released on bail and was attempting to cross the border into Hungary. He alleged that he was tortured while in a Ukrainian prison and said that if he was not heard from again, it meant that he was captured by Ukrainian authorities. So we haven't heard from him since then. And the State Department told Breitbart News on Tuesday, quote, We are aware of the detention of Mr. Lira in Ukraine. We take our role in assisting U.S. citizens abroad seriously and are providing all appropriate assistance. We are monitoring the situation but have no further comment at this time. We reiterate our message that U.S. citizens should not travel to Ukraine due to the active armed conflict, end quote. So the Breitbart report noted that the confirmation of a U.S. citizen being held in Ukraine for his speech comes as President Biden is looking for an additional $24 billion in spending on the proxy war in Ukraine, and as Zelensky is due in Washington. And, it just really goes to expose the hypocrisy of this whole thing, that, both Biden and Zelensky are selling this as a battle for freedom and democracy, but here the Ukrainians are locking people up for their speech and their thoughts, and they're, putting things out online that they don't like. And, if this was any other country, if this was an American in Russia, we would be hearing all about it. But because it's not, we barely hear anything about Lira. So, yeah, it's just something, I'll try to keep an eye on. Hopefully, there is something going on behind the scenes that'll get him released eventually. All right. So the next one here, Zelensky slams the UN Security Council, demands Russia lose its veto. So this article is from Kyle Anzalone at the Libertarian Institute. And Zelensky attacked the UN Security Council as an ineffective body to enforce its own principles. And he's calling for Russia to lose its veto power on the UN Security Council. So he spoke at a special session of the Security Council, which is usually rare for countries that are not members. And he said that the organization had failed to uphold its values. He said, quote, Ukrainian soldiers now are doing at the expense of their blood what the UN Security Council should do by its voting. They're stopping aggression and upholding the principles of the UN Charter, end quote. He went on to call for Russia to be punished for invading Ukraine by removing Moscow's veto power at the Security Council. So, this just goes to show Zelensky going after anybody he can that's not doing exactly what he wants. It's really foolish because, the UN Security Council is just the nature of it is that because the US, Britain, France, China, and Russia are all permanent members and they can veto. They all have veto power. That's kind of the whole idea of this. And for Zelensky, to do this, it's really just going to anger people. It's not going to change anything. You're just going to make more people angry. I just don't really see the point of what he's trying to do here by just going after the whole UN Security Council. So, again, it's strange. And there was Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, the Russian Foreign Minister. He was due at the Security Council session, but he showed up after Zelensky left. All right, so the next one here. Ukraine claims sabotage attack on critical Russian airbase. And this is another article from Kyle at the Libertarian Institute. The Ukrainian Main Directorate of Intelligence, the HUR, that's Ukraine's military intelligence, they claim that a sabotage attack was carried out on a key Russian airbase just miles from Moscow. The HUR has not provided evidence that any Russian planes were damaged or that the covert operation even happened, and we haven't seen Russia really report anything about this. But a Ukrainian official claimed that unidentified saboteurs blew up 2 airplanes and a helicopter in the Moscow region on September 18th. The sabotage took place at the Cholovsky Airbase, where government planes, doomsday planes, and reconnaissance aircraft are based. So they're saying unidentified people, but saying that the Ukrainian military intelligence was involved. But they just put out satellite photographs that show the airbase and the aircraft, but they don't show that they don't prove that anything happened. So it's not really clear what exactly went down at this airbase, if anything. All right. So the next one here, Raisi tells Biden to commit to the Iran nuclear deal. So this is yet another article from Kyle. He's been writing quite a bit lately, which has been a big help for me with this new baby in the house. Iranian President Ebrahim Raisi used his time in front of the UN General Assembly to request President Joe Biden commit to a return to the 2015 nuclear deal or abandon the agreement. The Iranian leader stressed that Tehran believes Washington's control over the global economy is faltering. So Raisi urged Biden to show that he would like to return to the Iran nuclear deal, known as the JCPOA. The U.S. should demonstrate in a verifiable fashion that it wants to return to the 2015 deal. So he's basically saying either do it or don't do it, and don't kind of try to say that you want to return to the deal. I mean, it's kind of been a while. You know, President Biden did say last year in November that the JCPOA is dead. He said that it was at some like campaigning event on the sidelines of it when somebody asked him about it. So I think it's pretty clear that he has abandoned it. You know, he came into office saying that he would restore it, but did not do what he needed to do to get back into the deal, which was lift sanctions on Iran. And Raisi explained that Iran was in full compliance with the agreement when then President Donald Trump exited the deal in 2018 and reimposed sanctions. The UN's nuclear watchdog, the International Atomic Energy Agency, it's the IAEA, they confirmed that Iran was fully complying with the terms of the JCPOA at the time. And under the JCPOA, that was their job. The IAEA's job was to see if Iran was complying. And Raisi noted in his speech that Tehran has to have peaceful nuclear energy and that Iran has no nuclear weapons program. That's something that's been confirmed by the U.S. intelligence and the Pentagon pretty recently. And, you know, he was also mentioning what was interesting was that the U.S. was losing its control of the global economy. And I think that's true. And I think Iran's a good example of that, because when Trump first pulled out of the deal and reimposed all the sanctions, it really hurt Iran's economy, especially because they lost lots of oil sales. But in the past year or so, they've been making up. Their oil sales are way back up because they found alternative markets in Asia, to China, countries that don't care about running afoul of U.S. sanctions now because they're starting to be targeted by U.S. sanctions. Iran's economy is still, you know, hurting and all that, but they're definitely finding alternative ways here. And, you know, the more the U.S. resorts to sanctions, the more, this alternative economic system, global system, is going to work out for countries like Iran and Venezuela that are targeted by all sanctions like this. All right, the next one here, the U.S. levies sanctions over Iran's drone program. So this is an article from Connor Freeman, and this is about sanctions that the U.S. imposed on Iran on Tuesday, targeting what they said was Iran's drone program. And they targeted 4 entities and 7 people in Russia, China, and Turkey over their alleged assistance with the Iranian drone program, which the U.S. says has significantly benefited Russia in its war in Ukraine. Raisi, on the other hand, has denounced the accusations. He claims that Tehran has not been arming Moscow since the Kremlin launched its invasion last year. I think the line from Iran is that they didn't supply any drones after the invasion. They gave Russia drones before the invasion. But I think just the fact the U.S. keeps, trying to sanction everything, adding sanctions to Iran when they're already under so many U.S. sanctions, kind of goes to show their desperation in a way. All right, so the next one here, China conducts drills in the Yellow Sea after the U.S. So the Chinese Navy is conducting drills in the Yellow Sea after the U.S. held joint naval exercises in waters off northern China with Canada and South Korea. So these drills that were carried out by the U.S. Were held last week, and they included an amphibious-ready group led by the USS America, which is an amphibious assault ship that can carry certain types of aircraft, including F-35 fighter jets. It's a pretty big naval vessel. And according to the South China Morning Post, these U.S. drills in the Yellow Sea marked the largest U.S. show of force in the Yellow Sea in 10 years. South Korea's defense ministry said that the warships drilled on tactical maneuvers and helicopter operations. After the exercises, the warships sailed to Incheon, which is a city on South Korea's west coast, to commemorate the 73rd anniversary of the Korean War Battle of Incheon, which was a major amphibious attack, amphibious invasion. to take back Seoul from North Korea. So if you're watching here, you can see the map. You see where the Yellow Sea is. This is China, to the west right there. So it's not clear exactly where the U.S. and South Korea and Canada were conducting these drills, but China's not happy about it. And they did the drills in the name of countering North Korea, just like all of the U.S. military activity in South Korea. They've been deploying bombers over there. Biden recently sent a nuclear-armed submarine for the first time in decades to South Korea, just for the sake of provocation. They're doing this in the name of, North Korea, but it's also really about the U.S. buildup in Asia that's aimed at China. And that's no secret. It's very clear to Beijing. And tensions right now are really high between the U.S. and China due to the increased U.S. military activity in other waters near China, including in the South China Sea and the Taiwan Strait. So analysts told the South China Morning Post that China's drills in the Yellow Sea were a tit-for-tat move. Chinese authorities announced that they were conducting 2 separate drills taking place in the northern Yellow Sea, so closer, in China's neck of the woods by the Bohai Strait. So Global Times, which is a Chinese state English language media outlet, slammed the U.S. drills in the Yellow Sea, saying that it was part of a strategy to encircle China. So that's how people in China are viewing this. This one Global Times article written by one of their contributors, Li Nan, said, quote, "The U.S. is changing its 10-year low-key manner in the Yellow Sea, demonstrating that it is integrating all the forces it can use in the Northeast Asia region, the East China Sea, the Taiwan Strait, and the South China Sea into a unified chain to contain China under its framework of Indo-Pacific strategy," end quote. All right. So the next one here, Azerbaijan and ethnic Armenians reach a Nagorno-Karabakh ceasefire. So it looks like the Republic of Artsakh, which is the ethnic Armenian de facto, government that has run Nagorno-Karabakh, which is the ethnic Armenian enclave within Azerbaijan's internationally recognized borders, as they call them. It looks like they've surrendered. This article is just from Al Jazeera. I didn't really have time to cover it myself. But this apparently was a Russian proposal for a ceasefire, and this was a day after Azerbaijan began an offensive to take control of Nagorno-Karabakh. And the agreement for a ceasefire started at 1 p.m. local time on Wednesday. It was also confirmed by Azerbaijan's Ministry of Defense. And so it looks like essentially the Artsakh has agreed to disarm, and they're saying that there's going to be a withdrawal of Armenian armed forces. Now, Armenia claims that they don't have troops in Nagorno-Karabakh, so it's not clear if they do or if they're just disarming the ethnic Armenians that are there. And they said that they're going to dissolve the government. So they've completely surrendered. And of course, a lot of Armenians are worried about ethnic cleansing, and there's claims of a genocide might be coming. So a lot of Armenians have fled to the airport in Stepanakert, the capital of Nagorno-Karabakh, to try to get out of there. But yeah, it looks like, Azerbaijan is finally going to get full control of Nagorno-Karabakh, and we'll see, who knows what the fate of the Armenians living there are going to be. I mean, I think they're saying that they will, give them their full rights and everything, the Armenians living there, but we'll see. So Armenians inside Armenia are not happy about this, and now that it seems like there's a lot of unrest against the government of Prime Minister Pashinyan, and he himself confirmed that the fighting had died down and that it was very important for the ceasefire to hold. So he said Armenia had not been involved in drafting the ceasefire and that it was not clear to which Armenian armed forces the agreement referred to. So he's still denying that they have any troops there. But we will see what happens here, how this all plays out. Again, I think there's going to be a lot of people inside Armenia really unhappy with Pashinyan over this whole situation. All right, so the next one here, Biden gives Netanyahu his long-awaited White House invitation. So President Biden and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu met in New York on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly on Wednesday, their first in-person meeting since Netanyahu came back and since Biden's been president. And Biden invited him to visit the White House before the end of the year. And they discussed some issues. Apparently, Biden raised the judicial overhaul. But one thing that they discussed, the biggest item on the agenda, was a push to establish formal relations between Israel and Saudi Arabia. And as I went over yesterday, the Saudis, their big condition for this is a mutual defense treaty with the United States. So that would have all sorts of very bad implications. And Netanyahu was discussing he said some things about this normalization deal with Saudi Arabia, saying that he thinks President Biden can negotiate this deal. So that's kind of the big thing. And Biden told Netanyahu that U.S. support for Israel is still ironclad, despite all the violence against Palestinians. That's not really what he's critical of the Netanyahu government for. It's about this judicial overhaul. But it looks like, Netanyahu is still going to get some good treatment from Biden after all. Going to get a nice trip to the White House. All right, so the last story here, the Senate confirms General C.Q. Brown as the next Joint Chiefs Chairman. So this happened late Wednesday night, kind of unexpectedly, because there was a block on all confirmation of military positions in the Senate. But that got lifted, and Air Force General Charles C.Q. Brown Jr. was confirmed on Wednesday night with overwhelming bipartisan support in the Senate and will become the only second black chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, which is America's top military officer. He was confirmed in a vote of 83-11. So this article I have here is just from ABC News. Again, this just happened pretty late. So what I know about Brown, so he's going to replace General Mark Milley, who is set to retire. I believe he's out by the end of the month, the end of September. And what I know about Brown, he's an Air Force guy. He's a fighter pilot. He was the head of U.S. Pacific Air Forces, which is why I think he's chosen for this position, because he has experience in Asia. And the China Hawks are happy that he's coming in, and he's all about China, and revamping the Air Force, and now, overall the military, as he's going to be the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. So I think that's why he was picked, for his experience over there in Asia and, with China. And it's like a different type of military leader. Milley's an army guy, a ground guy. When it comes to a future war with China, it's going to be Navy and Air Force that's, doing most of the fighting. So I think that's the thinking there. So I'm pretty sure so he's confirmed, and I guess Milley is going to be out by the end of the month, and he's going to come in, and we'll see what the stuff he has to say about Ukraine. What I've seen him say so far is kind of the typical generic stuff. But being in the top position, maybe he'll, say some different things. We'll see how it plays out. But that is it for the news for today. Go check out our Viewpoints. We have one from Ted Snyder, fact-checking Biden's UN speech, words versus action. One from Brad Pierce at his Substack, Africa is a continent, not a chess piece. One from Ted Galen Carpenter, Nicholas Kristof, a faulty prophet. One from Daniel Larison, a mutual defense treaty with Saudi Arabia is absolutely unacceptable. One from Daniel L. Davis, we can no longer hide the truth about the Russia-Ukraine war. Go check out our blog. I neglect the blog, but we have a lot of content in there, including Kyle Anzalone's great show, Conflicts of Interest. Go check that out. And if you're scrolling on antiwar.com, another thing that we have that's a nice resource is that we put a ton of news stories, kind of minor, not so much minor topics, but things that I didn't write up or that weren't big enough stories to be on the top of the page. At the bottom of the page, we have sections broken up by country and region. And these are, from different news sites. They're not all the best articles, but it's just a good resource for people. We have a lot of journalists and stuff that check antiwar.com every day, and I know they always scroll down and see all these different news stories that we put together. But that is everything. You You could always help us out just by sharing the show, liking, subscribing on YouTube, commenting. I appreciate all the comments, all the interaction, and just everything, everybody that's listening and watching this show. But I'll be back tomorrow with some more news for you. Thanks for listening.